space of 27 blood-soaked minutes, 12 innocent people gunned down.
Get me off!
6 ectoplasmic emanations. Don't worry, they can't escape.
Well, that's just terrific, honey. We've been in town for 3 months, and you're making friends with the Manson family.
I came by train. I was going to take the flight, but I didn't feel good about the plane.
No, I'm gone.
Question. What makes the hero of a good story worth rooting for? Are we looking for the tragic backstory that forces us to sympathize? Do we need to see our hero lose everything so that we can truly wish for them to gain it all back? Is it the underdog with good intentions who seemingly has flaws that any audience member can relate to? Or could it be that what makes a hero of a story is just having the most lines and the most to do in a given scene? Either way, if a hero talks like a hero and seemingly behaves like a hero, but is completely motivated by their own agenda and personal gain, are they still the hero? What if this person's motivation changes and their humanity is restored by the end of it all? Can we overlook their initial selfishness? Well, in the case of the Frighteners and Frank Bannister, who for all intents and purposes is the hero of this story, the lines become blurry as we find ourselves rooting for him as kind of an everyman who has flaws and layers that are easily relatable. He's a mostly regular guy who suffered a terrible tragedy and has found himself largely disconnected from his community and society as his way of coping. Or at least, that's what we're meant to think.
Okay, well, folks, I can do a clearance, but it's not going to be cheap. Although I do offer a 6-month guarantee.
The Frighteners is Peter Jackson's cult classic that has been cast into the shadow of the director's more notable works, as in this movie was Jackson's final film before his career would change forever with the release of the highly beloved Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's a story about grief, obsession, and redemption as we follow Frank, a paranormal investigator with a sixth sense who can see and talk to ghosts, which he uses to haunt the locals and thus generate business for his ghost-catching hustle.
Frank Bannister, psychic investigator? That's right. Well, that's a good one. How can you see the corner coming? You stupid moron!
But when Frank starts seeing the mark of a dead local serial killer on potential living victims, he must find a way to conquer the dead in order to save the living. But what we really see is a broken man with an incredible gift who learns to push the limits of his ability in hopes to make up for the skeletons in his own closet. It's a dark and macabre tale that will entertain you at every turn. And in today's episode, we're gonna cross over into the afterlife and see what makes the Frighteners a true cinematic haunt. I'm Kier Gomes with JoBlo Horror, and you're watching Deconstructing. Alright folks, today we get into The Frighteners, and right off the bat I have to admit, this movie is by far one of my favorite ghost stories of all time. Peter Jackson delivered us a visually entertaining film with heart and soul at the core, and I eat it up every single time. But as always on this show, I'm here to break down the film into 4 key categories that can help to narrow down why it's so special. We're going to be looking at the origin, where I talk about the behind the scenes of the film and how it got made, which, spoiler alert, is a very interesting story all on its own. Then we talk about the legacy of the film, where we cover some of the more timeless aspects of the movie that are still recognizable today. Moving on to trivia, where I'll give you some fun facts about the movie that you can share with your friends. And then we cap it all off by talking about the film's X Factor, where I get into the single detail that truly makes this movie a worthwhile rewatch. And I have a feeling that that topic will be an especially difficult one for me due to my love and admiration for this film.
You realize, Agent Dammers, we have no forensic evidence linking him with any of the deaths.
Doesn't matter.
Now, The Frighteners has an entire documentary dedicated to the making of the film, but to distill it down to its most interesting version, here we go. Peter Jackson and his wife, Fran Walsh, originally conceived The Frighteners in 1992 with a 3-page treatment that pitched the general story. The treatment ended up in the hands of Back to the Future director Robert Zemeckis, who planned to use the idea as a spin-off film to the popular Tales from the Crypt TV series. Of course, after Jackson and Walsh delivered Zemeckis a full screenplay, he quickly saw the potential for the movie to exist on its own and hired Jackson to direct, with Zemeckis acting as an executive producer and financier. The film was given a budget of $26 million and got the green light from Universal Pictures to start shooting in 1994. But oh, that's not all.
Oh, plus $100 for materials. I can't be out of pocket.
Just do it for Christ's sakes, Bannister.
The script was so well received that Jackson and Zemeckis were also given full creative control to make the movie they wanted to make. They had what's known as final cut privilege, which means that they decided on the final edit of the film. And to me, this makes all the difference, and we will be talking more about that later. Weta Digital signed on for the movie's visual effects, and this is probably easy to notice once someone points it out, but the ghosts in this movie look very similar to the ghosts in Lord of the Rings.
The dead do not suffer the living to pass.
The pale blue and transparent design adds a coldness to them that kind of makes them a signature VFX calling card for Jackson's movies. And in case you need to hear me say it, I fucking love the look of the ghosts.
Talking about, you're in great shape.
My joints are getting powdery.
The making of this movie would prove to be a perfect training ground for Jackson to hone his skills that would later come in handy in his Lord of the Rings work, but also for Weta Digital, as when this movie was made, they had less than 3 years experience in digital effects. The Frighteners used more visual effects than almost any other movie ever at that time. It was something that audiences had never seen in this capacity before, and that in and of itself makes this movie special. It feels like everyone involved was pushing new limits while making it, and it shines through in every aspect of this movie. While today we see visual effects in almost every movie, at the time, shooting Michael J. Fox interacting with a ghost in the same shot meant that each scene needed to be filmed twice. The actors playing humans like Michael J. Fox, Trini Alvarado, Jeffrey Combs, and Troy Evans never did their scenes with any actors who played ghosts. For example, in this scene where Frank has to explain to Ray that he's dead, Fox had to stand on the set and say his lines to like a tennis ball off screen. And then Peter Dobson, playing a ghost, filmed his responses to Frank's lines in front of a blue screen, which they then digitally composited into the film and made it look like two people talking. This is also known as split screen photography, which again is much easier now. Hell, even I can do it. While the production was difficult and taking longer than anticipated, the studio had so much faith in the final script that the film was given an extra $6 million, and the release date was pushed forward nearly half a year to make the summer blockbuster season. And as if having names like Peter Jackson, Robert Zemeckis, Michael J. Fox, and John Blick wasn't enough, the score for the film was done to perfection by Danny Elfman, who you know is the composer behind some of the best cinema in history. With revolutionary visual effects, a screenplay that inspired faith in the studios, and some of the biggest names in cinema attached to this movie, it was time to release the ghouls. Now, the question here is, what do we talk about when we talk about The Frighteners? When this movie was released in the summer of '96, it was met by what I personally believe can only be described as being dealt a bad hand.
Oh my God! Oh my God, I don't believe this. This is not happening!
Here's what I mean. The Frighteners is a film that takes a gothic and dark tone while also having a script packed with charm and wit and light dialogue. It's basically Tim Burton meets Ivan Reitman, or Batman Returns meets Ghostbusters.
Let's show this prehistoric bitch how we do things downtown.
The point that I'm trying to make is that this movie, despite being mostly tame and family friendly, save for a few violent scenes, the MPAA granted this film an R rating. Jackson fought to get the film a PG-13, which I believe it totally deserves.
You gotta just walk up to Frank, just look him in the eye and just say, Frank, give me what I want, I'ma bust your ass!
The movie was forced to wear the dreaded Rated R, which rendered the film's target audience unable to access it. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s, and I definitely had friends who would not be allowed to watch certain movies strictly based on the rating. And while I think that's valid for some films, this movie is way too lighthearted to feel like an R-rated movie. Honestly, if Batman Returns can show this, and still get a PG-13, why can't The Frighteners show this without getting a rated R. And while we're on the topic, Jake Busey gives by far one of the most unhinged performances in this movie, and this is absolutely part of the film's legacy. His commitment to chewing the scenery as Johnny Bartlett and going full madman works perfectly in this wacky, dark movie. Gary Busey would be proud.
I can't wait to see old Ted's face when he hears the news.
Now, all of that to say that this movie underperformed at the box office, bringing in about $29 million, which was less than the movie cost to make and market. I believe that if the movie had been made PG-13, like it should have, The Frighteners would have been a haunting but magical summer blockbuster that we'd see getting the praise it deserves today. And the movie was very well received by audiences and critics, which further proves my theory to be correct, and I found this quote from Kenneth Turin from the LA Times that I think perfectly explains what we love about this film. Director Peter Jackson, at home with all kinds of excess in New Zealand, keeps everything spinning nicely, not even losing a step when the mood turns increasingly disturbing. This movie is remembered for being a beautiful and unique ghost story that isn't afraid to go to the dark places and deliver on the thrills. I watch it at least once a year, and it still gets me every time Frank kills himself to fight the Grim Reaper and then barely makes it back to life. I'm talking edge of my seat every time.
I gotta have an out-of-body experience.
What?
And I gotta have it right now.
And perhaps the most memorable aspect of this film, for better or worse, is the character Milton Dammers, an FBI agent who is left mentally fucked after surviving a childhood encounter with the Manson family.
My body is a roadmap of pain.
This dude is straight out of your worst nightmares, and his gross, creepy mannerisms and weird Shakespearean dialogue is severely disturbing. In fact, I take back everything I said. This movie deserves to be rated R just for this guy.
The power of the mind
Is absolute.
Alright, let's play a game. See if you know the answer to this question. Which notorious serial killer was the character of Johnny Bartlett and his crimes inspired by in the film? Was it A, John Wayne Gacy, B, Richard Speck, C, Ted Bundy, or D, Charles Starkweather? Comment your answers below. For fans of horror, you probably also recognize Jeffrey Combs as Herbert in The Reanimator, another cult classic horror film. In fact, Peter Jackson specifically requested Combs for the role of Milton Dammers because of his performance in Reanimator. So I guess you could say,
I gave him life.
And one last fun fact for the fans, did you know that R. Lee Emery's dead drill sergeant cameo in this film was intentionally made to be almost identical to his character's hard-ass personality in Full Metal Jacket? I just think that one's fun.
You cannot bring your spooks in here without my permission! Disappear, scumbag!
And here we are, folks, the one that we really want to talk about, the one that is sure to be unique to this video and carefully curated to kick ass. I'm talking The X Factor. Now you know what I'm gonna say. This was tough. There's just so much to love about this movie and so many things that make it special to me. But what I'm looking for is something new. Something about this movie that hasn't been praised but deserves to be. Something spooky.
Bartlett carved it into my forehead as highly dying. I was the last.
While I don't think it would be unfair to give the X Factor to the movie's incredible visual effects by Weta Digital and the immaculate set design that puts viewers directly into the scene, I can't do that because of course these things can be found receiving well-deserved praise from just about anybody who's seen the film. The New Zealand landscape gives the movie a bleak and rainy feel while also offering beautiful green mountains and a charming small town atmosphere. But to get away from the same compliments that this movie always gets, we need to keep looking. I even considered using this segment to talk about Frank's hustle as a ghost whisperer. When we meet Frank, he's a slick and fast-talking con artist who uses his ability to see and speak to ghosts to have his ghost buddies haunt local houses so that Frank can come in and kick them out.
Oh boy. Oh, this could be the worst case I've ever seen. Oh yeah, this is bad.
I think this really adds to the quality of the story, as it shows Frank's initial relationship to the dead was to use them to benefit himself. He had an almost lack of respect for them, and he saw them as merely tools for his craft.
That fellow takes us totally for granted.
But throughout the story, Frank grows to understand and empathize with these ghosts. It adds a lot to his arc in very subtle ways, and it's brilliant. But that still wasn't quite gonna do it for me. I got it. It's explained in the film that Frank's wife is killed in a car accident caused by Frank. This accident supposedly killed his wife, but granted Frank with the ability to see ghosts. Well, a side element to this is that Frank was building a beautiful house for himself and his wife before she died, but after her death, Frank continued living there, but never finished the build. His house doesn't have a roof, walls, safe floors, or any accommodations, yet Frank continues to live there. This shows us that Frank, being a grieving widower, does not feel content with moving on, partly because of the guilt he feels for supposedly killing his wife, which we learn later is not exactly true, but also showing that Frank's inability to move on is matched only by his inability to make his current environment comfortable. In Frank's mind, he doesn't deserve a fucking roof. He doesn't deserve a comfortable bed to sleep in or a kitchen to cook in. To Frank, he's already dead.
I mean, look at this place. It's a dump. God, this guy's a loser.
Seeing a man who believes he deserves nothing learn the shocking truth that eventually sets him free, and thus giving Frank a second chance at life.
Be happy.
Oh, it had to be the X Factor. It had to be. So my friends, as always, I am curious to know your thoughts on this cult classic film.
Oh, finally, I'm in the conversation. Terrific.
And we will see you next time on Deconstructing. Good night.